So good morning, everyone. So my job today is just to visit basics again when we are talking about these results of heart failure or the kidney protection. We are just visiting the basic actions or mechanisms by these wonderful drugs are working, and we are using them in day-to-day of clinical practice. So we know these are the challenges. Whenever there is a type 2 diabetes person is in front of us, we do not want hypoglycemia, we do not want weight gain, but we want a good intensive decrease in A1C without producing hypoglycemia and weight gain, that's basic. This we need to manage on the top of continuous decline of beta cell function, which is there. With polypharmacy and so many drugs in prescription, there are very good results of research shows that poor adherence is one of the main cause of not reaching to the outcome. So designing your prescription correctly, motivating the patient and explaining the importance also carries a lot of importance in the practice. What is the Ferranini in the initial his beta cell shows that the beta cell response to increased glucose, that how much insulin will come from that, is lost in type 2 diabetes. More is the severe hyperglycemia, less is the response from the beta cell. And that is again a challenge as beta cells deteriorate, as the duration of diabetes goes up. And so the drugs which are working on beta cell may not work after a few years, and that's our clinical experience. So we need drugs which are insulin independent pathway, and they are helping beta cells to recover. About kidney, after the credence and lot of work again from SGLT2 inhibitor, now we know that kidney is not a victim of diabetes, now it's an ally, and we are using it not only to treat diabetes, we are also treating heart failure through kidneys, and our understanding of diabetes and heart failure and kidney is getting better thanks to all these CVOTs. So normally, kidney filters and reabsorbs a large proportion of the glucose, and we know this pool that 180 grams gets filtered and gets reabsorbed completely. So in type 2 diabetes, there is a hyperglycemia, and the kidneys actually filters more glucose because the threshold changes. And because there is a SGLT2 overexpression, which I will come in next few slides, all these excess glucose goes back to the body, which contributes to severe hyperglycemia. So normally, whatever glucose is filtered from the glomeruli in the proximal tubule, 90% of it gets absorbed through SGLT2 receptor, through GLUT4. So these are sodium and glucose co-transporters, which takes back all the glucose which is there in the urine, and there is a minimal excretion which comes into the glucose. What happens, because of this excess glucose goes back into the body, that contributes to whatever hyperglycemia is already there in type 2 diabetes, so which again increases the severe hyperglycemia. In the initial years of hyperglycemia, the threshold for the renal threshold goes up, and you can see the more glucose gets reabsorbed because the SGLT2 receptors are overexpressed. Because there is more glucose coming from the glomeruli, the body senses that the SGLT2 needs to work more, so their expression goes up, GLUT4 expression goes up, and all these excess glucose gets reabsorbed. The whole graph shifts to the right, which contributes in the enormous way to the existing hyperglycemia. So as I was saying, you can see here in the proximal tubule epithelial cells, SGLT2 expression is more, GLUT2 is more, which again contributes to more kind of a glucose uptake in type 2 diabetes. SGLT2 inhibitors, they correct this whatever is happening in the early stages and in patients with type 2 diabetes with hyperglycemia and more glucose getting filtered. This excess reabsorption is blocked mainly by SGLT2, which these molecules have very high capacity for the glucose transport. The drug's story started way back in 1835 from the florizine, which got extracted from the apple bark. We all know this story. After so many years, almost 75 years, these drugs, they came as drugs. If you know, all the initial research was designed for the kidneys with SGLT2 inhibitor. Then the Empire came. If you see, the designing of the credence was much earlier. Then the EMPA-REG came, the focus shifted to heart failure, and again back after the credence to the kidney. But all this goes to these wonderful drugs which have this multiple action. How it started, we know familial renal glycosuria, which is an autosomal genetic disorder of SGLT2 genes, so they are absent. So what happens, whatever glucose is there, gets filtered through the urine, and a healthy, normal individuals will get renal glycosuria without having any change in their life expectancies or without any complications in the kidney. So this was a familial renal glycosuria. So after that, there was a thought that SGLT2 inhibitor will not be produce any bad effect, but it may be useful for the patient. So what happens, whatever is the excess glucose which is getting filtered in type 2 diabetes doesn't get reabsorbed because SGLT2 are blocked by SGLT2 inhibitors, and all this excess glucose goes out from the urine. There will be urine glucose 4+ always when the patients are on these drugs, and which decreases, simple mechanism, it decreases hyperglycemia or the glucose levels. These are the early signs. So this is the normal, then there is a hyperfiltration stage when the GFR goes up. Then there is the CKD stage 3 and the nephron loss, which is the normal stages of diabetic kidney disease. These drugs not only stops reabsorbing glucose, but they work through tubuloglomerular feedback. Because you all have heard it many times, I have got a cartoon for you, which actually explains it in a nicer way. So what happens in the hyperfiltration phase or in the type 2 diabetes, we all know there is all these SGLT2s are overexpressed. So they are working more, GLUT4 are working more. So all these excess glucose gets reabsorbed, and along with glucose, also the sodium delivery to the later part of the tubule goes down. So the macula densa actually responds to the less sodium, and through the tubuloglomerular feedback, afferent arteriole gets dilated, which increases intraglomerular pressure, increases proteinuria. And this we all know. So what happens, that initial stages, there's a GFR goes up. When these SGLT2 inhibitor block this reabsorption, there's an increased sodium goes to the macula densa, which again responds through the tubuloglomerular feedback, and the afferent arteriole constricts, which decreases intraglomerular pressure, and initial stages, the GFR may go up slightly. We all know the RAS blocking drugs act on the afferent. They do have some effect here, but mainly through the afferent. So the combination of SGLT2 inhibitor plus RAS blocking drugs, ACE inhibitor or ARBs, there is an additive and additional benefit to the glomeruli and overall diabetic kidney disease. That's what very nicely seen in the CREDENCE trial. And the top of standard care ACE ARB, if you add an SGLT2 inhibitor, there is a benefit to the kidneys. Now, looking to whatever glucose is lost, there are a lot of other effects of SGLT2 inhibitor which improve beta cell function. There is improved insulin sensitivity. They improve overall fatty metabolism. There is a question mark GLP-1 response. There is slight increase in the glucagon, which is there, which is seen with the SGLT2 inhibitors. So it improves insulin sensitivity. Let's go back to the graph of Veranini. What he actually showed was if you treat glucotoxicity in any of your patient, if you shift this to the left side, the glucose levels go down, and you can see the slope of the graph improves. So the same beta cells start reacting to the same levels of glucose in a better way if you take care of glucotoxicity, and that we have seen in any kind of intervention. You do a strict dietary or lifestyle intervention or any drugs or initial insulin treatment. If you take care of the glucotoxicity, the beta cell function improves, and that's why we say that it improves beta cell function and then also the insulin sensitivity. So it has multiple good metabolic factors which are there. Mainly what you see clinically is weight loss, and there is a decrease in the arterial stiffness, endothelial function improves, and so on. The magic is it starts working within 24 hours, these drugs, so which is so good, and you see it in your clinical practice that the A1C reduction may take some time, but you see the weight loss immediately. Whatever the patient's baseline treatment, patient is on 2 drugs, 3 drugs, only on metformin, on multiple insulin doses with newly diagnosed diabetes or a 10 years duration of diabetes, everywhere SGLT2 inhibitors work and there's a decrease in the A1C. So one word of caution here, though these drugs do not produce hypoglycemia per se, but if your patient is on multiple insulins, sulfonylureas, DPP-4, and you're adding this drug, within weeks it will have a very good effect and your patient may have hypoglycemia. So you should be always careful when you are adding a SGLT2 inhibitor on the background of SU and insulin. They are very potent reduction of A1C. Not only reduction, it's a sustained effect. Dapagliflozin has the best phase 3 programs where there is a large number of patients and the more duration of studies are there to show us that A1C reduction is sustained. There is a good weight loss, and along with the weight loss, there is a less hypoglycemia when the A1C is going down, almost much less if you compared with sulfonylurea. We all know there is a very good effect of weight loss. It's not only weight loss, that is also sustained. It's not only initial and then it goes up. It's not like that. It is sustained, and again, dapagliflozin has a very good clinical phase 3 programs. Putting together, it's a sustained weight loss. We all know that, I remember the initial phase 3 trials when it was decided that we will check the liver fat or the adiposity or the DEXA scans to see what is happening to the adiposity. Not only the weight, but the fat mass is going down, which is also reflecting in reduction of the waist circumference, and lot of good metabolic effect, maybe because SGLT2 inhibitors are not only reducing weight because of the diuresis, but because of the fat loss and mainly the visceral adiposity, which are producing the bad metabolic factors. So all these things get translated into a good thing. There is a reduction in systolic blood pressure. You all know that SGLT2 inhibitors actually reduce the blood pressure variability also, glucose variability also, along with the reduction in whatever that mild millimeters of mercury. And we know that 3 to 4 millimeters of mercury reduction may translate into almost 10 to 15% reduction in the risk in all blood pressure intervention trials. So the multiple mode of action is actually helping our patients for cardiovascular risk. We just heard this, so I'll go through these slides. And that's what in congestive heart failure, I think Uday has gone through these, all the different mechanisms of action. But one thing is discussed again and again is switch to ketones, which is actually helping the myocardial cells, which SGLT2 inhibitors are doing in a different way. So actually the myocardial cells oxygenation is improved because the metabolism gets shifted to the ketone pathway. And that may be one of the reasons why it is helping as a myocardium, not through the vessels. Also, there is a difference from the diuresis. You know that when SGLT2 inhibitors are working, it's mainly interstitial volume which goes down, not much contractility in intravascular volume like diuretics. So they score over when they are treating these heart failure cases. The new thinking of sodium hydron exchanger, which actually changes intracellular as well as intramitochondrial calcium, with these drugs, again, they are improving myocardial. So there are lots of papers about why they are improving myocardial cells. And all this we know that is getting reflected into the significant decrease in heart failure hospitalization, EMPARE, CANVAS, DECLARE. And the baseline heart failure in all these trials were only 10%. So 90% of patients never had any heart failure. Maybe preserved ejection fraction or maybe normal heart. Still heart failure hospitalization was reduced significantly. That's why now it is being tested in DAPA-HF that whether it's a heart failure drug. Coming back to decrease in mortality, if your patient has a low ejection fraction, dapagliflozin reduces cardiovascular mortality, also all-cause mortality. To one more addition, along with ERNI, we should use this drug to give additional benefit to the patients to decrease mortality, along with decrease in the heart failure. So we know that there is an albuminuria reduction. I will go to the side effect profile for the last few slides. There are a lot of discussion about amputations which came after the CANVAS, and with big program of dapagliflozin and lots of meta-analysis, you know that there is not increase in amputations. DKA remains a slight increase in number. In all the trials of SGLT2 inhibitor, we need to recognize patients who are a lot of insulin deficient with severe hyperglycemia. Even though you want to start a SGLT2 inhibitor in such a patient, always have a background insulin, so as to avoid those very rare cases of diabetic ketoacidosis. So it's a clinical judgment. When patient is extremely insulin deficient, you need to be little careful. There is no increase in fractures. Initially, there was the volume depletion, AKI is not seen, Actually, you can see here the number is less compared to placebo in dapagliflozin arm. Initial submission to FDA, actually there was some discussion of increased malignancy with DAPA, which is not seen in large number of patients now. The mainly problems are genital infection and urinary tract infection. So all the trials have shown there is an increase in the genital infections, which are mild, can be taken care of, you all know about it, and very few times you have to stop the drug. Yes, there are patients where you need to stop the drug, but the number is very less. I would like to spend few seconds for the urinary tract infection, which is again discussed a lot. So majority of the trials are showing no significant difference in the urinary tract infections with SGLT2 inhibitor. There was a recent meta-analysis published with different SGLT2 inhibitor, and one was published in NEJM few months back, which doesn't show increase in urinary tract infections. The large database from the US, which actually said that there is no increased UTIs, did not take into the account the previous UTI history. So we do not know if your patient is already having recurrent UTI. Whether to use this drug is question mark, but per se these molecules compared to placebo in large number of meta-analysis, including 8 SGLT2 inhibitor molecules, do not show increase in urinary tract infection, but genital infections, yes, the fungal infections are slightly increased. Fracture risk, again with dapagliflozin, is not higher compared to placebo. So the real world data confirms efficacy seen in randomized clinical trials. Dapagliflozin is the only SGLT2 inhibitor which has a real 4-year efficacy, safety, large number of patients right from a DECLARE and all phase 3 program, which gives us a lot of confidence about this SGLT2 inhibitor in all sorts of multiple benefits which these drugs are offering. Thank you so much.
Any questions, if anyone's having? If no questions, then in interest of
one
time.
question, sir.
Okay.
At what level of eGFR you think this will not act when it goes below a particular GFR?
Now the recent guidelines have changed after the credence, and we can go up to 30. In credence, when the canagliflozin was used and the GFR went down below 30, the drug was not stopped. It continued and it showed benefit. So at present, the guidelines, whatever 45 it was initially, has gone down to 30. A mind of caution when we are using these drugs along with ERNI or ACE and ARB to look at the creatinine rise.